A swift reckoning for the Capitol riot triggers an historic second impeachment of President Donald Trump. Was the vote purely political retribution or the beginning of justice well served? Here in Texas, as the pandemic rages on, troubling vaccine numbers emerge from the CDC. The question still looming, is the Lone Star State getting its fair share of the life-preserving doses? And at the state capitol, lawmakers return amid the pandemic to labor on the people's business. Can a new House Speaker keep his pledge to hold the line on taxes and fully support public education? I'm Greg Rugen, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, conservative attorney and former State House candidate Susanna Docupil. Next up, Tony Diaz, host of Latino Politics and News on KPFT Radio. In the 3 spot, legal analyst and Houston attorney Carmen Rowe. Batting cleanup today, Marcus Davis, restaurateur and host of Fish, Grits, and Politics. And closing us out, conservative political analyst Gary Polland. Let's begin. Accused of inciting an insurrection against the very American democracy he swore to defend, President Donald J. Trump was impeached this week following a majority vote of the House of Representatives. With that action, Mr. Trump becomes the sole chief executive in our nation's history to suffer 2 such recriminations. Executed at lightning speed without testimony or thorough investigation, the impeachment vote came exactly 7 days after the U.S. Capitol was ransacked by rioters, some of whom prosecutors allege were intent on kidnapping and assassinating elected leaders, including the Vice President and the House Speaker. 10 House Republicans split with their party and voted against President Trump, who will now face trial in the Senate after his term of office expires. While Democrats insisted Mr. Trump presents a clear and present danger, Republicans called the rapid-fire impeachment banana republic vengeance, which would only fan the flames of division and perpetuate discord by creating a martyr.
When they objected, it was patriotic. But when Republicans do it, we're inciting a mob. We're liars and we're traitors. This is the double standard we should expect under total Democrat control.
If inciting a deadly insurrection is not enough to get a president impeached, then what is?
Panel, with so little time left in office, was this impeachment hardball partisan payback or a genuinely necessary message to any who would stoke the flames of government takeover? Let me start with you, Gary Polland.
Well, I don't think that Trump was trying to encourage people to take over the government. And by the way, I did check on the insurrection definition, and the legal definition is the instance of revolting violently against civil or political authority or against an established government. These 200 people were not taking over the government. They weren't even taking over the Capitol. There are 2,000 Capitol Police that probably, in retrospect, weren't prepared and didn't do their job, even though they were warned that there were some violent people who'd come down to the rally. It's interesting that they tried to invade the Capitol at the time that Trump was still speaking. So, look, the election's over. I wish that Trump had, after the electoral vote took place in December, to say it's over, Joe Biden is the president, and we move on. But you remember 4 years ago, the Democrats never moved on. They challenged Trump's legitimacy for the whole time. So we do not want to be distracted by a trial. There's government work to be done in Washington that is going to help the people for both parties, and we don't need a trial, and he's not going to get convicted. This is just retribution.
Marcus Davis, you buy that argument?
Unfortunately, I don't. Listen, the question is, which is it? Is it retribution or is it legitimate? I ask, why can't it be both? I am not giving the Democrats a pass on doing things that's advantageous. But I have to say, if you do the crime, then you must do the time. And Gary, I'm not certain what you were watching to say you don't think that he wanted them to overtake the government. Here's a man who knew who his supporters were. He knew who his followers were. He instructed the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. He knew that white supremacy was a core of his followers.
200 people, Marcus.
It doesn't matter. If 200 Muslims had said they were coming to the Capitol, you wouldn't call this anything less than an insurrection. If 200 black folks had taken over the Capitol, you wouldn't call this anything less than an insurrection. We cannot continue to cradle this white privilege in this nation where just because their skin looked a little different than anybody else's, and just because they were Republicans who stormed the Capitol with the intent of taking over the government. Let's not dress that up. And inciting a riot is a real thing that Donald J. Trump did. This is the same man that after Charlottesville stood up and said there were fine people on both sides. He emboldened them. And the GOP is responsible for this because in 2015, they knew exactly who Donald Trump was. Leslie knew who Donald Trump was. Ted Cruz knew who Donald Trump was. They called him a liar. They called him a cheater. They called him a race baiter in 2015. But because of the preservation of power and partisan politics, they changed their song in 2016, and they found out who he really was in 2021.
Let me go to Susanna Docupel, our Harvard-trained lawyer. What's your take on this?
Well, Greg, I think it's interesting because on the one hand, impeachment is designed to redress a violation of public trust. But on the other hand, there is always this element of partisan political hardball. As Alexander Hamilton said in the Federalist Papers over 200 years ago, the greatest danger is that impeachment will be decided more by the comparative strength of the parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. So for an impeachment to not be just a partisan political payback, what is that going to take? Well, I think the only way that you can actually effectively send a message beyond a partisan one is for someone to cross party lines. And if there was a message in the impeachment that went beyond party lines, I think it is the 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment to take a stand against the violence at the Capitol. Representative Liz Cheney led that effort, and she took a very strong and dramatic stand. She said that the president summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. So even if you disagree with her vote, Representative Cheney did send an effective message, and she provided political catharsis for many people in this country.
Tony Diaz, I know you've been waiting since this impeachment went down to have your say, so go at it.
I think it's very, very simple and straightforward. Donald Trump promoted the overthrow of the government. There's got to be repercussions for that. And I am stunned by Republicans who are putting party and really Trump before the nation. I'm proud of the 10 Republicans who did vote for impeachment along with the Democrats. We need to let this proceed further because we are a democracy, exactly what that mob tried to overthrow. So let's really dig in to what is in our best interest of all, is to have a democracy. And let's let the rest of the Republican senators tell history where they stand. Do you stand with a figure who undermined the Republican Party, or is he the definition of the Republican Party who clearly promoted the overthrow of the government? Or do you stand with the nation that will go through everything it needs to maintain the rule of law and no one's above the government?
Got to leave it there, man. Next up, we are going to dive deeper into the impeachment and examine motive. Are Democrats truly seeking justice or just aiming for a knockout blow? And later, the banishment of Trump from major social media platforms. Does it amount to censorship by big tech moguls putting their collective boot on the neck of conservatives? You can join the conversation on the Fox 26 Twitter page. Do you agree with the decision to bar the president from tweeting? Want to elaborate? Drop us a comment, and you may see it on air later in the show. What's Your Point is back in just 1 minute. Welcome back. A critical question still lingers over this week's deeply troubling events. With just a few hundred hours remaining in his presidency, was the second impeachment of Donald Trump truly about moral accountability, or rather, as many Republicans contend, naked political retribution? Panel, has the House, with this hyperdrive impeachment, placed our system of governance on a very slippery slope? I start with you, Carmen Rowe.
You know, it's concerning to me. It should be to everybody else that we're pushing impeachment through so quickly. The truth is that as a lawyer, we want to see the law get it right, not get it fast. The fact that we're pushing this through so quickly means we're likely not going to get it right. And so as much as we keep doing that, you have to believe that it's political retribution rather than something else. And as regards, the president's incitement of a riot, back to the evidence, these people planned this for weeks in advance. There were people on Facebook who announced that they were going to do this the night before. So I question whether or not a speech that he gave a couple of hours before this insurrection occurred is really the catalyst for everything, or it's more likely an expression of the serious divide and the high emotions around this presidential election.
All right, Gary Pollan, you heard Tony and Marcus. Your chance to rebut.
Well, I think that they're flat wrong, and it establishes a precedent that is really scary, because what's going to happen if this goes through and they actually have a trial, when the Republicans take control of the House, they'll start looking for reasons to impeach President Biden or President Harris for political differences, because that's what this is about. We complain about the criminalization of politics. This has taken it to a whole new level, in that we're going to be the functional equivalent of be thought of as a banana republic.
Okay, Marcus Davis, the precedent issue is something that concerns a lot of people, that this will just be whoever is in power will drop the political hammer on the executives if they differ from their party.
Greg, you're absolutely right. And Gary, to a certain extent, you're right. And this is the problem with the cancer that our nation has had, that I have talked about since the inception of this show, which is partisan politics. Everybody sings their song and dances their dance for their party. And then it changes every 2 years or every 4 years. The same way we thought that it was not okay to put a Supreme Court justice into place right before an election, and then all of a sudden, when they had the opportunity, they did so. Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this behavior, and unfortunately, because neither of them will stop, we're going to keep going down this rabbit hole. I do have to address the idea, Carmen. It wasn't just this one speech. This man has spoken about this time and time again, tweeted about it time and time again. While they were planning, he was steady egging them on.
All right, 20 seconds, Susanna Docupel. Are we on a slippery slope?
Actually, I think Americans have been on a slippery slope of losing faith in our electoral processes since Bush v. Gore 20 years ago. But Americans desperately want institutions we can trust because we believe in the country and we believe in the Constitution. And is having an impeachment trial going to help that? I don't really think so. I don't think it's necessarily clear that the Constitution allows the impeachment trial of the next president. And because there are these kinds of doubts, an impeachment trial keeps us further down the slippery slope of eroding trust in our institutions.
Got to leave it there. Coming up, disturbing numbers from the CDC strongly indicate Texas is getting shorted its fair share of vaccine. Welcome back. Unless the CDC's numbers are wrong or somehow been misconstrued, Texans have a legitimate grievance against the federal government. That is, the Lone Star State currently ranks 48th in the nation when it comes to the number of vaccine doses received per capita. 48th. That dismal ranking comes despite the fact that our state remains among the leaders in total COVID-19 hospitalizations. Bill King, a frequent commentator on this program, is demanding an explanation. Okay, this story broke Thursday, and we still haven't gotten a straight answer regarding the discrepancy, which amounts to hundreds of thousands of doses. Panel, what do you make of this? I'm going to start with Carmen Rowe.
I don't know what to make of it, except, there's some explaining to do, check with the government, but they're generally not bringing everything that they should the way that they should in most people's minds. But for me, famous people all over Texas and certainly here in Houston have bragged about getting the vaccine. Encouraging to me is that I know regular people, street level, who waited in line for like 3 hours and they got the vaccine, in the last couple of days. So if it's that accessible, it's encouraging to see that most people who need it or want it now are going to get it. And we're hopeful that those numbers will change. But for right now, it doesn't look like it's a dire circumstance for people here in Houston.
Marcus Davis, I called 5 congressional offices. Nobody had an explanation on Friday. We're talking about 400,000 doses that Texas should be getting. Does this concern you?
You know, it does concern me, but there is some conflicting information. While it appears as though we're not getting our fair share, ironically, we are also one of the nation's leaders in actually vaccinating folks. So I don't know how that balances out. We're not getting our fair share, but yet we lead the nation in the number of vaccinations. Now, with regard to how does this happen, why does this happen, I don't know. Maybe they caught the signal. Maybe they got the message. Maybe they got the message that Texas is a state that doesn't really care about vaccines because we don't believe that the virus is real. Maybe they got the message from the governor who just wanted to do business as usual. Maybe they got the message from Senator Cruz, who called his colleague on the floor a certain name because he was interested in wearing a mask. Maybe they got the message when we bailed someone out who decided to open their business against COVID rules. I don't know. We may not be getting it because we've sent messages that this is a hoax, this is a scam, and we don't believe in it. Furthermore, if we have a problem with it, it's because of the leadership in D.C. And the leadership in D.C. and the leadership in Texas are in lockstep. How ironic is that? Warp speed goes warp slow in Texas.
Look, Susanna Docupel, we're talking about New York getting 30% more doses per capita than Texas. Florida, something like 25%. California, 23%. Should we be concerned and should we be asking for answers?
Look, I am all for any and all efforts to bring more vaccine doses to Texas that are going to save lives. It does look to me like in my review of the numbers that we are not receiving doses in line with our population. And look, Texas has been rolling out the vaccines really efficiently. We got like 1.9 million doses, and we're the first state to give out 1 million of these vaccines. So we're doing a great job with what we have. And look, here's an idea. How about rewarding Texas for how efficiently we're rolling out these vaccines? You know, we've given out half of the doses we've allocated, but look at California. They got 3.4 million doses, and they've only given out 26% of them. So maybe some of these Californians who keep relocating to Texas can bring some of those unused vaccines with them.
Tony Diaz, no demographic in Texas has been hit harder than Latinos. Okay, I'm going to ask that question to Marcus Davis. Hispanics and African Americans have been hammered by this virus in Texas. Should they be asking for answers?
You know, like I said, I don't know if this is a picking point. The idea that, as Susanna just said, apparently we're doing well with rolling out the vaccines, and it doesn't appear that people are being shorted the opportunity, comparatively speaking. So I can't say that there's anything at file here, except we had an administration that did a poor job of rolling this out.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. We're going to try to get some answers, too. Up next, a Houston cop in the middle of the Capitol riot and apparently had company from fellow brothers in blue. How deep does fealty to Donald Trump run among those who wear the badge? Our panel is set to work through that topic after the break. Welcome back. An 18-year veteran of the Houston Police Department has resigned after it was confirmed he was among those who stormed the U.S. Capitol. Turns out former HPD officer Tam Pham was hardly the only pro-Trump rioter from the ranks of law enforcement. At least 7 officers from 5 different departments across the country are under investigation for allegedly participating in the riot. In addition, 12 Capitol Police officers are under scrutiny for some degree of dereliction of duty, including one member of the force who posed for a selfie with rioters. Panel, on a day when 1 cop was murdered by the mob and 50 others injured, what are we to make of this? I'm starting with you, Carmen Rowe.
Shame on them. Police officers have the obligation to protect and serve no matter their beliefs. And the fact that they put their beliefs in front of that service should be troubling to everyone, especially the police officers. And then to suggest that they could go and storm the Capitol and that lives wouldn't be compromised and people wouldn't be hurt, not to mention the fact that they tell this country, they tell other countries that this sacred place could be penetrated by people inside this country it's unfathomable. And it's worse that it's coming from, again, individuals who have sworn to protect and serve. And especially to know that one of our own here in Houston would be part of that violence, to be part of that, the result that was the death of one person and an injury to so many others, not just law enforcement that was there doing their job, but also all of the citizens who were there. And it's heartbreaking and it's troubling.
Okay, Gary Pollan, I use the term fealty. Should we be concerned that there is loyalty to the president that could inspire some in law enforcement to violate their oath?
Well, if they believe that, they shouldn't be in law enforcement. And the gentleman from HPD, he should not have been given a chance to resign. He should have been terminated. This is intolerable that we have law enforcement officers that are going to decide and participate in lawlessness. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen at the Capitol. It shouldn't happen with riots that went on this summer. It's just ridiculous. It's got to stop. And of course, that's all part of the whole theme. America seems to be sliding into becoming a banana republic, with our police officers now engaged in this kind of stuff.
Susanna, jump in here, but save some time for Marcus. Take about 30 seconds.
All right. It's absolutely shocking that policemen were part of this violence, and there's really no excuse for any of the violent protests that took place in the Capitol. You don't undermine the rule of law to protest injustice. And Martin Luther King had it right when he said, if we succumb to the temptation of using violence in our struggle, our only legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos.
Marcus Davis, take it away.
Greg, you asked, what does this tell us? It tells us the same thing that we've been told before. It tells us the same thing that the FBI had reported years ago when it said that white supremacists were infiltrating law enforcement and the military. This came out from our federal authorities, and we completely ignored it. So I'm not surprised. It also tells you the same thing that black and brown people have been telling for years, that there are dirty cops out there doing dirty deeds. And it's not just one bad apple in a barrel. It is a barrel that is corrosive.
Got to leave it there. Still ahead. The president, who often governed via tweet, booted off major social media platforms for good. Is it responsible policing of the digital public square, or a troubling descent down the dangerous road of censorship? Welcome back. The mob violence and destruction at the nation's capital triggered a sweeping, punitive response from our nation's high-tech and social media giants. The president has been banned from Twitter permanently and expelled from Facebook and other platforms, purportedly for messaging which incited violence and challenged the legitimacy of the November 3rd election. With those decisions, the executives of big tech deprived the president of his most instantaneous and compelling means of communication to his huge base of support. Further, in what some view as a preemptive strike, Amazon, Apple, and Google expelled the conservative media platform known as Parler, effectively scrubbing the site from the internet, at least temporarily. Panel critics on the right and even some on the left are calling these moves perilous acts of censorship. Susanna Docupil, I am eager to hear your thoughts.
Well, if we want to protect free speech on social media, and I absolutely think we should, the big question is, how are we going to do that? We can't just use the First Amendment because the Constitution applies to government actors and not private companies. And we can't just say, oh, go to another platform, vote with your feet, when the only real competitor just got shut out of the market. Some law professors, most notably Richard Epstein, have suggested that social media platforms could be regulated using rules applied to railroads and other monopolies and require them to serve everybody. But I don't think it's practical to count on the Biden administration to push very hard to ensure that conservative voices are getting a fair shake on Facebook and Twitter. I think it's far more likely that President Trump can take his 89 million Twitter followers and start his own conservative news empire if he wanted to. I mean, just imagine the Trump News Network with a social media platform, some Apprentice reruns, a little pro wrestling. It could happen. But seriously, when Twitter bans Trump's account, while allowing Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei's account to call for violence against Israel, it's very hard to see how Twitter is applying a consistent framework. And the only lasting solution to this problem is going to be an effective free market competition.
Okay, I want to talk to Carmen Rowe on this. Carmen, what do you think? I know you're a big fan of the First Amendment. Do you think this has gone too far?
It's way too far. So early on, I suggested that censorship and the unbelievable control that Google and other social media platforms have is troubling, and it should bother everyone. The truth is that this is supposed to be the home of the free speech, to criticize your government or to be the government and have opinions. The suggestion that Trump, and it's not just Trump, his minions and everybody else who speaks in a way that is not popular has been deleted from these social media sites. And the truth is, and the ACLU and a lot of other people will tell you, the worst type of speech has to be protected to protect everyone's speech. So the fact that they have shut these things down should trouble everyone. The fact that they're able to do it should also trouble everyone. This is an affront to our First Amendment right. Everyone should see it that way. And by the way, we're being criticized by China, who regulates speech. Like a lot of other countries, they have suggested that they've lost the small bit of respect they have for this country in this move by social media.
Gary Pollan, take 30 seconds.
Look, this is censorship, pure and simple. They've been waiting for an opportunity to do it. You've seen instances of this going on with Twitter, with them putting comments on some of the things that Trump said. This is bad for the country. Today they support the left. Tomorrow, who knows what they'll support. And freedom of speech abridged for conservatives abridges it for everybody. And this has got to be undone, or we're going to regret this day for a long time.
Marcus Davis, final word goes to you.
Listen, I think someone as irresponsible and as loose-lipped as Donald Trump, who has all the power in the nation, should be censored. Yes, I am perfectly okay with that, because the behavior that he exhibited was detrimental. And I don't know who said they've been waiting to do this. They let this go on for 4 years. It should have been done a long time ago. And hey, guys, what happened? I thought we were a capitalist nation. This is a independent-owned company that we're telling who they can have on their platform or who they should cut off. Either we're capitalists or we're not. If we want to conform to socialism, then let's conform to socialism. But don't do it on the policies and not do it in this practice.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Up next, genuine danger looming as Inauguration Day draws near. Is more violence inevitable, or can America dodge the bullet? In 3 days, Democrat Joe Biden will be sworn in as America's president amid what can accurately be described as an armed encampment. Compelled by credible threats of violence, the Pentagon has deployed 25,000 National Guard troops in and around Capitol Hill. Concern is hardly limited to Washington, D.C., with armed protests expected in all 50 state capitals. The FBI and Homeland Security are deeply concerned extremists will deploy explosives to generate chaos and provoke armed conflict. Panel, are you worried about what could potentially unfold during this critical week? I'm going to go to you, Carmen Rowe.
Absolutely. Look, as a lawyer who practices in the courthouses here downtown, including the federal courthouse, I'm very concerned. A lot of people have been advised not to go into these public buildings. Federal as well as state prisons are on lockdown right now to avoid any sort of violence there. So yes, I think it's something we should all take very seriously, especially with the last situation that happened at the Capitol. I mean, there are people out there who aim to cause harm, and we should take them seriously.
Sedan Docupil, I want to ask you this. Do you believe the concern is overblown, or are we likely to see violence this week?
Well, I think it's impossible to know for sure until we get there, but we have more troops in the Capitol right now than are currently deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And so I'd like to feel like they've got it under control no matter what's going to happen. That said, I have a really hard time believing that anyone would want to destroy George Washington's legacy of peaceful transition. And I think that part of moving forward together as a country after last week, I hope, is for all of us to collectively condemn violence as a tool of political communication by any person, anytime, any cause.
Marcus Davis, are you worried about what could happen this week?
Oh, without a doubt. But it's the same concern that I had leading up to the riot in the Capitol. This is, listen. We have people who tried to overtake a state governor, kidnap her, and hold her hostage, and we act like these things don't happen. These people are violent. But look, America has a history of violence. We are a violent nation. Let's not pretend that we're not. We started this nation through violence. We have continued this nation through violence. So I am not surprised what happened in the Capitol, and I'm not surprised what could happen moving forward. From the days that we told the King of England that we will no longer pay his taxes, and we fought against him. Then we fought against the southern states and the northern states to keep slavery. And then we fought against my ancestors to keep us from voting. We have a history of violence in this nation. So no, I am not surprised at all what would happen. I am greatly concerned. We just have to pay attention to it because we have a habit of not paying attention to the white supremacists who are the #1 domestic threat in this nation.
Gary Paulin, the final word in about 30 seconds goes to you.
Well, unlike the Capitol, where they had advance word there was going to be this problem and they didn't prepare, it seems like the FBI and the National Guard are well prepared for the inauguration. I anticipate no violence. And by the way, Marcus, there are other threats in this country besides the handful of white supremacists. Okay? You need to be open to the other threats this country has.
There may be,
All
but
right,
I'm going by what the
right
FBI
there.
said the #1 is.
We're leaving it there, folks. Still to come, a controversial rule change by the outgoing Trump administration has advocates for gay America alleging bigotry and discrimination. Welcome back. A parting shot this week from the outgoing Trump administration in the so-called values war. The Department of Health and Human Services finalized a rule allowing social service providers that receive government funds to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. The president contends faith-based providers should not have to compromise their religious convictions to qualify for federal support. Now, in response, LGBTQ advocates say this invites the exclusion of qualified same-sex couples to become adoptive parents solely because of their sexual orientation. Panel, is this measure a boost for religious freedom or institutionalized bigotry? I'm going to throw this out to Susanna Docupil.
Does is it affirms the First Amendment right of faith-based organizations. And for many faith-based foster homes, pairing kids with parents who share their beliefs is an important part of their religious expression. And without these protections, a lot of the faith-based organizations might just decide to close their doors entirely and leave kids in need with less options. Now, that said, the most important part of being a parent is not sexual orientation or gender identity, but how much you love your kid. And there are, as there ought to be, many LGBTQ-friendly agencies across the country and no shortage of children needing good homes for them to adopt. So the HHS rule promotes the freedom of adoption agencies to take on different characters and serve different target markets. And with more choices in the marketplace, everyone wins.
Okay, Carmen, does that ring true for you? I mean, say I'm a taxpayer and money that I pay the government goes to one of these faith-based organizations that chooses to exclude based on their faith. Is that okay?
You know, right now I think it is because it's in line with federal law. The issue is that we need to change the laws to protect the people. So currently there is a case on this issue pending in the United States Supreme Court, and I would expect that it's going to come out in favor of these changes. Excuse me. Additionally, Biden has made clear that he's going to overturn these provisions. So while this is like a last Hail Mary for Trump or whatever, I don't think that it's going to be around for very long. And I think the impact of this is going to be short-lived as a result.
Marcus Davis, 30 seconds.
I think it's straight up hypocrisy. You know, we're talking about protecting religious freedoms, and these are the same people that voted for a 3 or 4 time divorcee that slept with porn stars, committed adultery, and confessed to grabbing women by the crotch. You telling me that these guys are come on now, it's straight up hypocrisy. Be real. If you're gonna be about your religious beliefs, be about your religious beliefs. But you elected Donald Trump to office, so spare me your indignation.
Final word on this topic goes to Gary Paulin.
Look, it actually ought to be something that goes to the states and let the states decide. I haven't figured out why the federal government is involved in adoptions anyway, but I can tell you that in Texas has conservative government, LGBT people can apply and get adoptions through agencies. I see it happening in the courthouse on a regular basis, no issue. And so for people that have religious beliefs that do not allow it, should be allowed to do that, as long as we ensure there are other alternatives for those people who would like to adopt and want that opportunity.
Got to leave it there. Coming up, the business of lawmaking cranks back to life in our state's capital city. We're going to examine the chances of any significant change emerging in the pandemic-challenged 87th Texas legislative session. Welcome back. Beneath the shadow of this lingering pandemic, Texas lawmakers have returned to Austin and the business of governing. Logistically hobbled by coronavirus precautions and further limited by a budget nearly $1 billion in the red, incoming Republican House Speaker Dade Phelan pledged no additional taxation and no cuts to public education.
In order to unleash our state's full potential and emerge from this challenge, Texas children and educators must continue to be at the forefront of our legislative agenda this session. We cannot fail them when they need us the most.
Panel with Republicans still firmly in charge. Rice University political analyst Mark Jones says those hoping for votes on casino gambling or marijuana legalization are almost certain to be disappointed. Let me go ahead and start with you, Gary Pollan.
Well, I think that the $1 billion we're short is from the last biennium we're just coming out of. If we're going to fully fund the budget, they need to find some more revenue. Now, there may be revenue coming or grants coming from the federal government with the next stimulus program that Biden's come up with. But regardless, we need to take a look at other ways to bring in revenue. So casinos, the more easy level is a sports book, allowing to bet on sporting events, which also happens around us. That could bring in $1 billion a year. Legalizing marijuana can bring in $1 billion a year. And of course, they bring in casinos, which I don't think the state's ready for yet, would also bring in sizable dollars. And it also doesn't increase taxes on anybody. Now, there's some social implications for allowing this to happen, and there'll be a social cost to that, but it is a pretty painless way to bring in revenue. And so I think they need to be open to that as opposed to slashing education or other important programs.
Okay, the biggest priority of Democrats in the legislature, or at least one of the biggest priorities, is the George Floyd Act. I want to go to you, Marcus Davis. There will be lots of pressure placed on Republicans to come to the table.
And they should come to the table. It shouldn't be a lot of pressure to come to the table. We know what happened. We saw what happened. Everybody's familiar. This is where the GOP can step up to the plate and unite and lead, right? That's the tune of the day. With regard to the legalization, hey, there's a legalization of gambling and marijuana. I agree wholeheartedly with Gary. To say we're in a state that's not prepared to pass gambling, I don't understand, because people pass by us every day going up I-10 to go gamble in Louisiana. And we live on the border of Mexico where a ton of dope is coming in, a ton of marijuana is coming in, and we shouldn't just let those profits pass by. There's a saying in the marijuana community, puff, puff, pass. So I suggest we puff, puff, pass the legislation.
Okay, I want to go to Susanna Docupill because you have really good Republican contacts. Do you think there's openness to some of the components of the George Floyd Act within the Republican caucus? Susanna?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were talking to me. Yeah, to be really honest with you, I have not heard very much about this bill in the Republican caucus, but I do agree with Gary and Marcus that we should be open to taking a look at different ways of raising revenue to close that budget shortfall without raising taxes. And while we should take a look at marijuana and gambling, we should also take a look at the cost of regulation of those industries, because I can't imagine that if we pass this, it is not going to come with a significant amount of regulation. And legalizing gambling, imagine it could involve a new building for the gambling commission or salaries for commissioners. And so I would just also like to check what the cost of administrating these new programs would be before, and make sure it's a net positive for Texas taxpayers.
Carmen Rowe, just 20 seconds. If Republicans do nothing on police reform, do they hand the Democrats a big issue?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, it's not whether they do something, it's what they do. And the problem with George Floyd and a lot of the rhetoric that we hear is that a lot of people aren't drilling down on what really needs to change, because it's going to require a lot more than one bill.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Still to come, amid cascading scandal, the once uber-powerful National Rifle Association hits financial rock bottom. Could a new home in the gun-friendly Lone Star State be the perfect foundation to rebuild on? The one-time power broker known as the National Rifle Association has filed for bankruptcy protection following scandalous revelations of self-dealing by NRA leadership and gross financial mismanagement. Longtime NRA Chairman Wayne LaPierre announced the organization is relocating from New York to a state that values the contributions of the NRA, celebrates our law-abiding members, and will join us as a partner in upholding constitutional freedom. Panel, that state is our own Texas. Gary Pollan, are you welcoming them with open arms?
Absolutely. I mean, these are more good-paying jobs being brought to Texas. That's a good thing. Why they were in New York to begin with and organized there, I didn't understand. That's a very hostile environment. So that's a good move, and I think the NRA will continue to be a relevant organization. Though I will say their hobbling for this election hurt President Trump.
All right, Marcus Davis, what do you think about Texas being home of the National Rifle Association?
You know, good news for New York and terrible news for the state of Texas. What does that say about our state, the NRA? And don't get it twisted. You're talking to a card-carrying, gun-toting Second Amendment believer, but I think just the NRA, we finally found out that this 800-pound gorilla can be hit and hit hard and hobbled, and that's what's happening. It's unfortunate that, bring them closer, bring them to Texas, because I got something to talk about. I want to talk about why they didn't defend Philando Castile, who should have been a poster child for the NRA. I lost all respect for them after that. Gave up my card and everything.
Susanna Docupill, jump in here.
Well, I am absolutely for gun rights and bringing businesses to Texas. But the lawsuit situation with the NRA, it's a little bit complicated when they could actually move to Texas, because then as they're under investigation by the New York Attorney General and the bankruptcy court getting involved and appointing a trustee, it seems like it might be a long time before they're actually bringing businesses to Texas. And I have to say, I really hope that somebody does look into the allegations that the donor contributions were going to designer suits and private jets and African safaris. I really hope somebody looks into that. I have some concerns about that.
Okay, Carmen Rowe, final 30 seconds goes to you.
Well, the NRA has been in New York since the Civil War when it was a friendlier place, but I think there's no question that they are making an end run around the investigation and ultimately perhaps the fallout of that investigation by the New York Attorney General. And so coming to Texas, I think, is a lawyer's creative idea to work around what's ultimately going to be a significant fallout, it looks like, on this investigation. So hopefully they're getting control of it by doing this and coming to Texas. And of course, we're friendlier to gun rights, no question.
Greg Abbott is welcoming them with open arms, our governor. Thanks for joining us. The conversation continues on a national level next with Fox News Sunday and host Chris Wallace. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week.